applied through mass media communication. Welcome to Week 7. This week, we'll be looking at law and political issues that impact mass media. This can include things like the First Amendment, as well as social media. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you today a conservative political consultant, as well as a political science and MBA master's graduate, as well as a great colleague and friend. I'd like to introduce to you today, Mark Olson. Thank you for coming, Mark.
Good to be here, Ashley.
Well, what got you first interested in politics? I'm just curious. It's killing me. I want to know what got you interested.
This is the second time that I've been asked that question today. There's probably parts of the story I shouldn't share. No, I was always interested in politics from a young age. Really, I would say that every election cycle, my dad would bring me into the voting booth with him, and he'd let me pull the lever because we had the levers and the punch cards at that time. And it was always in the fire station. So I think it was maybe I was more excited initially about the fire truck and the sticker I got from the firemen. But then I was just fascinated by this thing because then we'd come home and we'd turn on the TV and Tom Brokaw would be announcing the results. And I'm because I'm a pretty competitive person. I was fascinated by the numbers, like it was like points on a scoreboard, and then I also had for whatever reason my mom had a couple books on the White House and the presidents, and I just would carry those around with me. I was just fascinated by the pictures in those books, so I just started reading and tracking with those books. And then I realized as I got a little bit older and turned into a rebellious teenager, I liked picking fights with people. And I would do that through verbal sparring over politics. Often I would just take whatever opinion was contrary to all the people around me just to pick fights and have fun. And then I got into music, and I tried to do music school at Belmont. I was on a trumpet scholarship, and I had to take a gen ed, those horrible gen eds that everybody as a college student is like, why am I taking this? And I had a professor, Dr. Von May, who was the most incredible political science professor ever. And I was like, I just was so in love with his class. And at that time, I had suffered a jaw injury that was ending my trumpet playing career. And I went into his office and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And he's like, why don't you do political science? And I'm like, oh my gosh, your class was amazing. I loved it. I could do this. And so that just kind of, yeah, that's how it all happened. So watch out, students. Those gen eds might change your life.
That's true. That's kind of how I got in communications as a good teacher. But in this course, we're talking about mass media communications. How have you seen mass media such as like social media impact political campaigns or elections or stuff like that?
Well, I think the biggest thing, because as I deal with this not only as a political science professor, but also as a professional that does consulting and campaign work in what little spare time I have. Everybody really gravitates towards, social media. It's imagined to be this panacea. So like when I'm meeting with a candidate or prospective candidate or interest group, they always quickly jump to what their Facebook campaign is going to be. And I often kind of have to put the brakes on it because I think there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about what it is, what it's actually capable of doing. It gets way too much attention. And this long-winded answer is really coming around to, I think the big thing about media is, unlike any other time in human history, we have access to so much information, and a person can go out and find the information that validates what they already believe, unlike any other time in history. And Facebook or Twitter or social media is just an example of that. And it makes it easier. So, in the kind of the psychology of elections in campaigns and politics, we talk about, self-selection bias and how people just surround themselves with people and groups that think exactly the same thoughts as they do. And so, uh, you know, this was obviously a little bit harder even 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Oh my gosh, yes, 30 years ago before the internet. Now I'm feeling old. Um, but you'd have to move or choose more physical locations like houses of worship or different gyms or clubs or restaurants to eat at. And there wasn't quite a connection necessarily towards politics, but we would see that. I mean, we would see that people would self-segregate on race in the neighborhoods that they chose, and obviously people do to a certain extent self-segregate to the where they live on based off of political values. But now that's all done with a mouse click on Facebook. So if you have a set of values, if you are a supporter of President Trump, you are more likely to like and join groups on Facebook and Reddit and Twitter, and you're likely to join groups that are only pro President Trump, and you're likely to only listen to uh, Twitter posts from people who are also pro President Trump. Now, if you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, or take your pick of whatever of the 20 candidates running for the Democratic nomination in 2020, if you're a supporter of them, then you go on to Facebook and Twitter and you find other people and other groups that support your preferred Democratic candidate. So it's both sides, they do it. But what happens is we kind of create these insulated bubbles of information. These literally, I mean, you'll hear the phrase echo chambers, where we just self-select into an echo chamber of people and groups that tell us the exact same things that we already believe and make us feel better about what we do believe, and just it reinforces. So I think that's the biggest impact that social media and mass media have had.
Would you say that's like the biggest challenge?
It's a challenge to a certain extent. Now, in politics, when we're especially when we're dealing with campaigns, there's a myth about persuading people, and the bottom line is people don't change their opinions on things, especially really quickly. Not typically. I have at times in my life, and I'm just a weirdo, okay? But most people are either Democrats or Republicans, and if we do public polling and we have people say, yes, I'm a Republican, or yes, I'm a Democrat, but they always kind of say, well, I kind of lean this direction, or I lean towards being a Republican, or I lean towards being a Democrat. And what we find is that those people, if they choose to vote, they always just reliably vote whatever direction they lean towards. And my point of all that is there's very little persuasion that ever happens. And we've known that since the 19 this is one of my favorite stories to tell. Poor Greg back behind me hears me tell it once every 8 weeks to one of my classes, at least, about the Festinger study on cognitive dissonance from 1954. They watched this UFO cult that thought the world was going to end on December 22nd or 21st. And when December 22nd rolled around and the world hadn't ended, much to the dismay of these researchers, the UFO cult actually didn't dissolve. It actually grew in size and lasted for like until the mid 1990s, I believe, off the top of my head. And that theory of cognitive dissonance that Festinger created, one of the consequences is basically people don't change their minds about things, and when they are presented with information that conflicts with their already held views, their brain goes into overdrive trying to find a way to justify their already held belief. And once their brain justifies that already held belief, then that already held belief actually grows stronger. So if you fail at trying to persuade somebody, you actually do the opposite. You entrench their already held belief that you were hoping to persuade them of. The opposite, you entrench that already held belief even deeper into their brain. So what you see again is you see a lot of these people on, and even our society in the mass media, say, why can't we just have a conversation about this? Well, it's just not how human psychology works. And so again, you have this, the social media and the mass media, the current social media, just it triggers the brain especially then when you talk about like Facebook and Twitter. How many of us are guilty? I'm guilty of it, even though I pretend to not be, of getting emotionally invested with how many likes. Like, you liked a photo that I posted the other day on my Facebook feed, and because of that, like, a little bit of dopamine was triggered in my brain, and I was like, ooh, I feel good about myself. I heard somebody describe it once as brain cookies. Like, my brain just got a little bit of got a little cookie, and it's like, ooh, I like this, right? So because of that and that dopamine and then the serotonin, we tend to just it just reinforces that psychological aspect and that emotional aspect of, I'm just going to find people who agree with me and make me feel good about what I already believe, and we don't really have a conversation with other groups or other tribes and what they believe in. We just kind of talk past each other and yell at each other and get brain cookies from making fun of the other groups to our group better than everybody else.
Well, with the coming election, the next presidential election, how do you see politics changing thanks to, the social media or internet or mass media or First Amendment?
I think you're going to see current trends continue. I think you're going to see, again, more self-selection. Um, I think you're going to have increased concerns um, with privacy and the potential of foreign states intervening in our elections. Now, I can tell you, like, I will assure all your viewers that political science is pretty clear. Russia did not impact the outcome of the election. Okay. And I know that's going to make some of your viewers of this really sad and others feel vindicated, but there's a lot of like asterisks with that. Okay. So they didn't change the outcome of the election. Presidential elections are decided very early. It gets back again to that thing where people, they're either Democrats or Republicans. And even if they say they're kind of moderate, the actual moderates who are persuadable and switch parties, it's very rare. And the number is just, there's not enough people there to actually change the outcome, especially of a national election. Okay. So you're going to see, again, continued growth of parties pandering to their bases and trying to rile up their tribes, because fear and anger turn out votes, whereas happy feelings don't turn out votes. So the anger and the tribalism is going to continue because it's just the easy way to get out votes. Other nations, though, I think are going to continue to try to meddle in our elections, because even though they're not going to, and this is why I was saying there's a big asterisk with my thing, even they don't actually have to change the outcome of the election to be effective. They just need to convince enough Americans that they changed the outcome of an election to make us question our, the fundamentals of our constitutional system. So North Korea doesn't actually have to change the vote totals. They just need to hack a few election systems in the right precincts in a state like Florida that's always, right on the edge, and just make people question the outcome of the election to cause enough chaos and disarray. I know in a lot of our international relations courses, we talk about this. We talk about the nature of the international system, and because mass media is international and anybody anywhere with an internet connection can get on it, we are in, I know I talk about this in my terrorism and asymmetrical warfare class. We are in a world where there is cyber warfare, and nation states have a lot of there's just a lot of reason and incentive for those nation states to try to even just cause a little bit of chaos in another country's elections. I don't know this from firsthand knowledge, so please, nobody in the government hunt me down. I have no doubt, like, other countries do it to us. I have no doubt we've done it to other countries. And I promise I don't know Edward Snowden. I've never talked to the guy. I've not read anything on WikiLeaks. Okay. So, like, but it's just, that's just the nature of international conflict. So if they've done it to us, I have no doubt that we've been doing it to other nations and other elections and all that stuff. So I think you're going to see, because of that, you're going to see, okay, so I'm summarizing, increased hostility and tribalism and anger and fear. And then you're going to see increased concerns about privacy. And then that gets to your question about the First Amendment rights. Now, what do you do with Facebook? Because, you know, the internet is not a public utility. So Facebook and their platform is proprietary. It's owned by the shareholders of Facebook. You know, their controlling interests essentially own their proprietary software. So like last week when they purged Alex Jones and InfoWars again and a few other nefarious ne'er-do-wells off of their platform, a lot of people got up in arms about, well, you can't do that. Well, it's also their property. You know, you don't have, a person doesn't have a right to use Facebook. I don't have a right to go have a cookout in your backyard unless you invite me to do it. But then if I ask permission to, you know, use your backyard for a cookout and you say yes, and then I um, have too many spirited drinks and I start making a fool out of myself, you have a right to ask me to leave. Because it's your property, you know, and so it's kind of the same thing in the digital frontier. Now we're in this is new, so the courts are sorting that out. You know, is the internet a public utility or is it private space? You know, where a person who owns a website and a server, and I mean that's confusing too, because oftentimes, you know, if I send you an email, that email is very likely routed through, you know, Johannesburg and Israel and Moscow and then up to Greenland and then back to your email inbox. You know, so it's crossing international lines. So, you know, we're talking about an intangible space. You know, and then, you know, what can a privately held company do and not do? Now we have Supreme Court precedent, you know, and these seem like tangential cases, but I talk a lot about it in my classes. Is, you know, we have a Supreme Court precedents on you know, bakers who want to refuse service to certain individuals who are getting married because of, you know, their LGBT Q wedding, and you know, the baker or the florist has a religious objection, and the courts have supported that because they're a privately held company and they have certain personhood rights. You know, we have the whole campaign finance and the Hillary movie from the court case a few years ago, the Citizens United court case, that says that there's corporate personhood and a corporation has free speech rights as itself. And then you have like Hobby Lobby in a Supreme Court case that says that they can restrict uh, their employees' access to certain healthcare plans on the basis of birth control. So then by extension, do companies like Google and Facebook have a right then to kick people off of their platforms? Because again, these aren't public utilities. We're not talking about access to streets or roads, or streets are roads, streets, sidewalks, water, electricity. But then does the internet become labeled as a public utility? Or is it different because these aren't privately held, closely held companies? These are publicly traded companies. And so once a company is publicly traded, does that change its protection? I don't know. These are questions that politicians will sort out. That's why politics is important. You know, we say that politics is, this is a Harold Laswell book that we just, everybody in political science states, is politics is who gets what, when, and how. And so we're going to decide via politics in our society who Facebook gets to let on their platform and when they get to let them on there and how they get to let them on there. And that's what we're going to sort out in the political process.
That's a lot of good things to start thinking about, actually, because we're thinking about all that stuff. And for this class, what advice would you give those who are thinking about getting into like the field of politics, like maybe doing advertising or their social media or things like that? What advice would you give those students?
You know, I guess I'd say this, and this is what I tell my students is, especially as a professor, my goal is to hopefully, above all else, teach my students how to ask better questions. So, you know, I'm not interested. I really have no energy or time to try and change people's ideas, especially in my classes and even on my Facebook feeds, even though I do pick some fun fights every now and again. But if you can ask better questions, I think questions are always an invitation for yourself and for those around you to dig a little deeper. The other thing I would say is get informed. 70. I wish there was only 74, but I have the study right here. It's my motivation. It's my Monday motivation, even though it's Tuesday. This is from the University of Pennsylvania. 74% of Americans cannot name all three branches of government. I'm just reading this, so this is not my words, but nearly half of those surveyed, 48%, say that freedom of speech is a right guaranteed by the First Amendment. So that means over half of Americans don't even get that free speech is a First Amendment right. 37% of Americans, so a third of Americans, can't name a single right in the First Amendment. So I don't know how we're going to have even to begin to have a productive conversation about anything political if an overwhelming majority of Americans do not even know what the First Amendment says. We have people in our society, and the majority of our society, voters, who don't even know the fundamentals. And if you don't even know the fundamentals, when somebody then spouts off something on social media or in the mass media, and it's not right. You don't even have the fundamentals to say, that's just not adding up. So, and maybe you don't have to challenge everybody that says something silly online, but at least you personally can go, that doesn't really add up. And I know because, I learned a little bit about the three branches of government, and that just doesn't jive. So then you're more informed, and you can then choose better political behavior in line with what you believe. And I mean, this is one of my favorite speeches to give. So hopefully this makes it into the cut. And then I would tell students, go out and fight for the things that you believe in. I shock a lot of people. I have some pretty strong beliefs on some, hot button issues. And a lot of the times people get a little frazzled with me because I often encourage the opposition to advance their ideas as well. Not because I agree or they're going to persuade, because again, I'm confident, I know about how persuasion works, but we have a system that is based on a competition of ideas and commerce. I talk a lot about Federalist Number 10 by James Madison. And in that, he talks about, and the Federalist Papers were written to support our Constitution, because it was pretty controversial what they were creating in the Constitution. And he said that, essentially, this is Mark's paraphrase, that we're better off when we have a competition of ideas, a fierce competition of ideas. So it's not about beating down the other team or blocking somebody else from sharing their ideas. It actually makes my ideas better and stronger when those ideas that don't necessarily fit are also very well communicated. I'd like to imagine that I'm a genius, but I'm not. Maybe I just pretend, right? But I believe it or not, have been wrong on things from time to time in my life. Like, I don't have it all figured out, and nobody does. So the point is when conflicting ideas are expressed to the best that they can be, and they're allowed to compete with each other, not in a shouting match, but vigorously, there should be passionate debate about these topics, then the best ideas will win out. So I would tell your students then to just get involved in the things that they care about and believe in. Whether their professor thinks that it's good. I mean, don't hurt anybody. We're not talking, but like, go, if you, I'll just cut to the controversial stuff. If you are pro-life, then go advocate and support pro-life groups and demand that they conduct themselves with the best behavior they can and with good conduct, and that they vigorously, in a informed way, they vigorously communicate their ideas. And if you're pro-choice, then go get involved with pro-choice groups and demand the same, that they conduct themselves with dignity and that they put forth the best ideas that they possibly can in the best way possible and the most persuasive way possible. Because in the combination of that fierce but vigorous but dignified competition over those ideas, then, as our founders and James Madison wrote, the best ideas are going to come forth, and we as a society are going to be better for it.
Absolutely. That's very well said. Thank you for that.